Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so you have this new book out called Justice at Trial: Courtroom Battles and Groundbreaking Cases. So when we look here in the forward, it's pretty much one of the first few pages. It says in your book that every law student should read this book. Do you agree with the writer of this forward? Should law students read this book?
Yes, and I thank you for mentioning it. The dean, Erwin Chemerinsky at Berkeley Law, wrote the preface for me, which was, and that's what he said, and he's quite an authority on legal education. But I taught a class at Berkeley Law for 10 years on persuasion, how to take over the room, how to choose your words, how to be a courtroom lawyer. And I loved that. And if this helps people, I think that'd be great.
And so when we look inside the book at chapter 8, which is titled "The First Amendment Defense of a Television Movie," you share the story about a TV movie, Born Innocent, which came out in the 70s, and how years later it came out that a young girl was assaulted in a similar way to what was shown in that TV movie. Well, you ended up representing the network, correct? And not the little
Yes.
girl. So without giving too much away about this chapter, what can our viewers get from that chapter of the book? What was that like for you to represent not the victim but the company instead?
Well, in America, censorship, the idea of censorship, which is very timely right now, is always with us. It's like a bad seed, and all of a sudden it appears again. The plaintiff's lawyer was a good friend of mine, but he wanted to punish the network for running a movie which showed a rape scene of a woman raping another woman. Never been done before. And we tried that case, and we actually won it in both the trial court and then on appeal. And one of my people that endorsed my book actually had a lot to do with that case, and so we won that. But I'll give you one example of the excitement of the trial. First day of trial, the judge calls us into chambers, talk to us about what's the case, and we told them, I told them, we have 70 news people out there, including news people from London and Paris, because the idea of suppressing a movie because someone imitated it would have thrown out half of Shakespeare. And so it really was a cutting edge case. And I talk about it and give that idea. It was the imitation. So there was the movie, there was an actual assault 3 days later that was similar I won't describe it, but the manner of attack was similar in the actual case. These teenage kids attacked a young girl on Baker Beach in San Francisco. And she was the plaintiff. She was complaining about the movie.
Hmm. And I have to ask, we talked about this briefly a few moments ago, but censorship. And, even before the interview, we were talking about censorship of books. And I guess from your legal perspective, as we know, there are a lot of school boards that are, throwing out certain books for kids to read. And, even states are trying to take control over these things. From your legal professional perspective, are these things okay?
No, no, not at all. And they're very authoritarian. In other words, a person decides, I'm not going to let you read this.
Mm.
And of course, the history, I did a lot of First Amendment cases over the years. I won't bore you with all the different cases. But over the years, there have been famous historical examples. James Joyce's Ulysses, which is a classic book, was suppressed until it was published by a bookstore in Paris, finally. And if I recall correctly, there were 150 copies of it or something that they published because they had the courage to do it. Suppression of ideas is not democratic. It has nothing to do with a democracy and letting people know. But more than that, what happens is there are groups that are to be suppressed by authoritarians. They are not to be recognized. Their issues are not to be recognized. It's almost like they're not supposed to exist. And we have right now in this country major authoritarian instincts, as you well know, with your wonderful work. And that was what the movie was all about.
And you have covered a wide variety of cases. Of course, it's mentioned in your book, and even just looking at your work in general. When it comes to advocating for certain things, let's say like voting rights and like we talked about freedom of the press, have you encountered any challenges? And if so, how did you tackle those and make sure that those who needed to be represented were rightfully represented?
Well, exactly. You asked a very important question because about 90% of the people that go to court on civil cases don't have a lawyer. And they have to figure out the law. They have to do their best. The judges are decent about it, but judges aren't allowed to help one side of a controversy. And so all those issues, and lawyers are good about doing the pro bono, and that accounts for the 10%. Yeah, so justice is a tricky business, and I just wrote a long article. I don't know if anybody's going to read it, but about the difference of justice in the trial courts, where the judge is actually experiencing the evidence, and justice, which is attempted always in higher courts, but they haven't seen the witnesses, and when they make a decision, they don't know what future cases will be. So I try to analyze the question of justice. What is justice? We talk about it all the time, and very few people really know what it is. And so you've asked a very interesting question.
Even there was a chapter in here about an innocent man who got who got to walk after years, and it reminded me of a case that I had covered as a reporter when I was in North Carolina. His name was Dante Sharp, and he was falsely accused of a crime, and he was in jail for, gosh, if not close to 20 years, over 20 years. And then, I got to cover that case as he was, acquitted, as it was proven that he didn't do what he was accused of doing, and to see the emotion in the courtroom and to see the excitement, the tears, and all of those things, I was like, wow. I was like, that was probably my one interesting court case that I was just like, wow, this is crazy. And I was
that moment where my client and a lot of lawyers had worked on his case before I got into it. Wonderful lawyers. The Innocence Project in Santa Clara, south of San Francisco, had worked on it for 10 years. But that moment when we all saw through the glass that he was in civilian clothes, he wasn't in chains, which every other time I saw him, he was convicted of murder, arson, and a woman and her 2 children had died. He didn't do it. And the story is there, but that moment where he comes out and was hugged by his sister who never gave up on him, his 2 boys who never gave up on him, and then he turned to me and he said, "You did it." And I said, no, I didn't do it. You did it.
And thanks so much for watching Advocate today. Download the app in the Apple or Google Play Store to stream us live, and you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Advocate channel, I'm Aaron Dean.